A wall of fire smashed into me. Dispatches from a month in Gaza. Excerpts from the diary of Atef Abu Saif, the poet who I read in my last piece. Saturday, October 7th. I didn't have any appointments till 10 a.m. when I was supposed to be in Carrara near Khan Yunis to participate in National Heritage Day. This was probably going to be the last chance to swim in the sea this year. It was all going to be so simple. But nothing in Gaza is simple. We arrive at the beach. The sun is still sleeping. I realize this is the first time I've swum this year, and the feel of the water is joyous. Rockets and explosions coming from sea and land. This is normal in Gaza. By the time I'm on dry land, I realize something's going on. This isn't a one-off strike. We head for the car, but the sand is difficult to run on. We make it to the main road, but the car is still another 500 meters away. The further we go, the more dangerous it feels. It isn't until midday that I realize this is different. Instead of Khan Yunis, I go to the press house in the Rimal quarter of Gaza City. There, I meet a group of journalists, including Bilal, the manager of the house. The only thing we can agree on is that we have no idea where this is going. Monday, October 9th. The news alerts inform me that the latest airstrike in Al-Tirans in Jabalia has killed 50. Al-Tirans is the heart of Jabalia. From there you reach any other point in the camp quickly. The souk is just a few hundred meters to the south. The elementary schools are over to the west. The area where my family lives is nearby to the east. The supermarket, the bureau de change, the falafel shop, the fruit stalls, the perfume parlor, the sweet shop, the toy shop, all burned and buried. Walking on the ruins is overwhelming. Blood covers everything. I have to be careful not to step on it. Tuesday, October 17th. Last night, I had no choice but to sleep at my friend's house in Jabalia. For 3 nights, I had slept in the gardens of the press house. Yasser, my 15-year-old son who was visiting Gaza with me when this all started, spent the nights with me, sleeping by my side. He was terrified, of course. I was born 2 months before the 1973 war started, and since then I have lived through an endless war. During the first Intifada, I was shot by the Israeli soldiers. Bullet fragments were lodged in my liver. I was 15 years old at the time. Parts of that bullet are still in my liver. The British surgeon calmed my mother down and told her her boy would survive. Every time I find death standing in front of me in the middle of the road, like I did at this moment, I try to gather my courage and convince myself I'm going to survive, just the way the British surgeon told my mum I would. This time is different. This time, I can't convince myself. Wednesday, October 18th. Since yesterday, we haven't eaten. We only drank coffee and more coffee. I passed by many bakeries trying to find one that was less overwhelmed than the others. In the end, I gave up and queued in front of one that only made particularly big loaves, ones used for shawarma wraps, made in a classic clay oven or forma. I got lucky. After only an hour and a half, I was served, and they still had enough flour to make our bread. Jabalia is one of the most dangerous places in the Gaza Strip, one of the hardest hit, and yet we were lucky to have been there last night. There is no guarantee, anyway, that if I do move south, I will be safe. Dozens were killed yesterday in a cluster of missile strikes on the Salah el-Din road, the main artery of the strip heading south. As my journalist friend Bilal, who also manages the press house, always says, there is no safe place in the Gaza Strip. Tuesday, October 24th. For me, the happiest moment is when I wake up, when I clutch myself, check I'm all there, and then look around the room. I made it. I conquered the night. Sometimes I'm still not convinced, so I've started to invent tests to prove I'm alive. One of them is to wake up all the others in the house and start talking to them, exchanging news. The more mundane the details, the better. From the dullness of the details, I know it's not a dream. Another test is calling my wife, Hannah, to tell her that Yasser and I are still alive. Her voice could never be reproduced in a dream. Wednesday, October 25th. I go down onto the street and try, like the other men of the neighborhood, to help in the rescue efforts. It is hard to touch the pieces of mutilated bodies and to gather them on a blanket. Even harder is to try to identify the bodies, first by determining their gender, then their age, and then to make the most difficult guess. Who was this person? Thursday, October 26th. We count the hours with the number of missile strikes. We mark our days by the number of entire families wiped out. We say, this happened when Israelis hit the Baptist hospital, or that happened the day Hatim, Huda, and their family were killed. Friday, October 27th. One of my relatives, Bothina, asked me unironically when most of her family were wiped out, is it my fault? This war? She wasn't being rhetorical. Of course it's not, I told her. Bothina's question comes back to me in my dreams. Her face and the sound of her imploring God that day to leave one of her grandchildren alive so that she would have something to show from her life. She tried to make a bargain with Allah. She failed, of course, as 2 days ago, 5 days after the original attack on the house they were staying in, we found the bodies of the last 2 kids. This morning, another airstrike explodes nearby. It is just a few buildings to the north of my neighbor Faraj's. As usual, we all go to the targeted house to help with the rescue effort. This time it is the house of Mahmoud Mohassain, whose mother-in-law is my aunt Ratiba. 12 people were killed under the rubble. A cigarette saved Mahmoud. He had gone outside to smoke when the attack happened. He lit his cigarette, and as he started to inhale the smoke, his home and family were destroyed. He was injured, but lost all his kids. I have no idea what I will eat today. I have to ask Yasser if he will queue at the little Saj bakery on Ouida Street. There's a queue of around 50 outside of it. I tell him, you'll see, an hour and a half maximum. While he waits, I go to a supermarket and buy anything in it we can eat without cooking. I ask my mother-in-law, who was born in Ascalon in the year of the Nakba and was brought to Gaza as a baby. Are you afraid? With her faint voice, she says, Of course. On the street, people were standing around in groups. Suddenly, we discovered that we had all lost signals. All mobile networks and the internet had been cut off. Everyone stood around getting busy with their phones, turning them on and off again, trying to reconnect. When I arrived at Faraj's place, he confirmed there was no internet connection or mobile network there either. We are cut off from the world, we realize. We are disconnected from what is going on, even here. All we have to rely on now are the explosions we hear, the fire we see, and the shaking of the ground we feel. As the explosions grew louder, Mohammed tried to get a radio signal through Faraj's mobile. After an hour, he managed to find one station. The news anchor was talking about the launch of the land invasion. They were even talking about the communications blackout. Mohammed laughed. It's funny. Today they report on how they can't communicate with Gazans anymore, but yesterday when they could, they didn't actually bother to hear from any of us. At 6 a.m, I am happy to find myself awake and alive. Faraj has already gone down onto the street. Dozens of local men are out there chatting too, equally glad to be alive. These morning gatherings have become a ritual, like a celebration of survival, of having made it through another night. Halayam has relocated from Beit Lahia to an empty shop down near my Aunt Fatima's building. 9 of them have been sleeping in this cramped, hot place. She tells me that her house was destroyed and those of her husband's relatives were as well. The 2014 war destroyed her house, which she rebuilt after 4 years, and which now this war has destroyed once more. My father-in-law asked to give him a lift to see Wissam in the Al-Shifa hospital. Wissam is my wife's sister, Huda's daughter, and one of the only members of that family to survive an attack in the first week of the war, although she had to have both legs and a hand amputated when she was eventually rescued from the rubble. We go and spend a few minutes with Wissam, who seems more awake than before. Widad, her sister, tells me that last night Wissam ate for the first time. This is such good news. I ask her what I can bring her later that evening, and she says, full-fat milk. Sunday, October 29th. When we get to the civil defense station, they tell us that since the signal has come back, they've been inundated with calls. For the last 36 hours, their teams could only guess where they were needed. Ambulance drivers and police officers were astonished to find dead bodies lying in the middle of the streets in front of them on their patrols. Hundreds are still alive under the rubble right now, they tell me, struggling to survive under the ruins. Some have even sent text messages from under the rubble that were only now being received. Driving in the city has now become almost impossible. Soon, I'll have to abandon the car completely, either because it runs out of gas or because the street I'm on gets bombed at both ends. Tuesday, October 31st. I've brought some pizza for Wissam. Last night, she asked for pizza. I laughed and said, "You know we're at war, right? No pizzerias are open." Not to be put off, though, I drove way out east to the huge supermarket in Nafak Street and found some mozzarella. The supermarket was simultaneously empty of products and full of people. Most of what's left needs to be cooked to be eaten, and no one has the electricity to do this. I was lucky to find mozzarella. I went from there to my sister Aisha's place so that I could sleep the night there and wake up early and make it in her clay oven. She still has some fuel left for it. Having studied in Italy for 4 years, I know how to make a good pizza, but Aisha insisted on making it herself under my close directions. Outside the hospital, 3 men and 1 woman are lamenting the loss of a loved one. They're standing in front of his body, which lies on the ground in front of the tent where the dead await burial. 2 meters to the right of this tent, I cannot believe what I see. A piece of brain surrounded by spots of blood is lying on the ground. The piece is like a small ball. It looks fresh. I nearly throw up and keep walking. Wissam likes the pizza. I boast that it was made under my instructions as an honorary Italian. The fighting is getting closer. Israeli troops are approaching from the west and the north. Wednesday, November 1st. When Ibrahim called yesterday to ask if I was in Jabalia or not, I had no idea how bad the bombardment had been. Everything is destroyed. The old alleyways and narrow lanes that Jabalia was famous for had now all disappeared. It had all become one place. This is what we call the Sinara neighborhood. I know every building and who lives in each of them. Many of the alleyways that have disappeared witnessed key moments in my childhood. In my mind, I can redraw those alleyways and redraw the boundaries, re-sketch the buildings. Give me an architect and $1 billion, and I can rebuild it from scratch. I spend 2 hours helping with the relief effort, trying to search for survivors and removing bodies. Raed, a friend, survived a strike on his family home, but now he looks for his loved ones. He points to the spot where he thinks his family must have been sitting when the strike hit. Usually, they sit in one of these 2 rooms, he explains, pointing to a pile of concrete that he has deduced was once those 2 rooms. We start removing stones and chunks of concrete with our bare hands. Under the concrete we find books, lots of them. Raed says, "Yes, I'm right, this is the living room. These are my father's." For a second, I can't help reading the titles of the books. Suddenly, we touch hair. We have to be careful now, as this seems to be a woman's head. After 19 minutes of clawing at the ruins and removing gravel and sand from the bottom around the head, we are eventually able to carry out the severed head and chest. We put it on a blanket and continue searching for the rest of the body. After an hour, we have only managed to collect severed pieces of her body. Part of an arm, a few fingers, a few spinal discs in the legs. It is a surreal world. Someone brings me a spade, and I dig, looking for more bodies. Raed is sure that the rest of them are down there. A young man shouts that he's heard someone panicking a few meters east of him. Our work is now to pinpoint the exact source of sound coming from below. After an hour, the young man was saved and carried to the hospital. Back at Faraj's place, we sit in silence, not believing what we have just witnessed. We all feel that by the end of the war, our entire group will be killed. None of us will be left. For 3 hours we chat, sharing the names of those we know who've died and reminisce about them, refreshing old memories. As we talk, we suddenly remember old friends we haven't heard from recently and wonder if they're still with us. Our friend Adam lost 2 of his cousins. His older son survived by a miracle. He tried to talk to him on his mobile, but the boy is incapable of speaking right now. He is too traumatized. Truth be told, we are all traumatized. In the morning, I get to the press house very early. I tell Bilal, I miss myself. I miss Atef. I miss being me. Thursday, November 2nd. Adam lost his son Abed in the airstrike last night. The airstrike hit Adam's family home. Now Abed is dead. His grandmother is dead. His aunt is dead. Adam lost 3 of his family in an instant. We all kept the light of our mobiles on so that we could help the rescue teams to see better. I tried to take the hand of a boy, maybe 10 years old, whose eyes were still sleepy, and to get him into the ambulance. No, leave me, he says in a very tired voice. I want to wait for my mom. Your mother is okay, I say to him. No, she isn't, he protests. Where is she? A moment later, a woman is carried past on a stretcher. We take the boy to look at the woman to identify her. It's not her. 15 minutes later, his mother is pulled out of the rubble, alive, and he finally agrees to climb inside the ambulance and sit beside her. An hour and a half ago, another attack destroyed a 5-story building at the eastern end of our street called the Anbar building. I was looking pitifully at the damage and thinking of all the lives hidden under the rubble when I had a strange memory. In the ground floor of the building, there was a famous barber shop owned by the brother of Adam. It is called the Sharawi Barber Shop. When I got married, 23 years ago, I had my hair cut there. Friday, November 3rd. Only a limited range of vegetables are still available. Potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, aubergines, onions, and if you're lucky, courgettes. You also need to know the names and locations of all the pharmacies, though they're currently all closed, of course. But besides all these, shops, groceries, street vendors, pharmacies, the most important thing you need to become an expert in is bakeries. Personally, I know all the operating bakeries on the route from Jabalia to Gaza City. Last night, I planned to go to bed early, but Adam, who is still in shock from the loss of his son, mother, and daughter, couldn't stop crying. At 5 a.m., we hear the street coming alive below the window. People are heading to the bakery already to get a good place in the queue. Some are carrying their batteries to whichever solar-paneled house has electricity. Some carry mattresses back to their homes after sleeping at relatives. The vegetable man starts shouting about his cucumbers. No milkman, no sweet seller. The war doesn't give you options. Saturday, November 4th. A missile struck one of the 2 schools where hundreds of families had been seeking refuge. They'd moved there from their houses in the west near the beach. Most of the kids that died were also pupils of the schools. Instead of learning math, they learned death. Not a single body retrieved from the massacre was complete. They were all obliterated. The scene looked like a meat shop where the butcher really enjoyed his job, where he did it all for fun. Last night, I failed to get any bread, nor could any of my friends spare me any. Instead, I boiled macaroni, added some salt, and ate it. I promised, Yasser, tomorrow we'll have bread. Now it's midday of the tomorrow in question, and I have no idea how I'm going to secure any bread for us. I still have one small bag of macaroni. I'm a lucky man to have it, but convincing Yasser how lucky we are might be different. Sunday, November 5th. It was around 7 p.m. I had just parked the car not far from Faraj's place and was intending to walk the rest of the way when I saw my father. He was heading toward my sister Amina's flat in a 5-story block some 20 meters away and asked for some help climbing the stairs alone in the darkness. My son Yasser took his hand and accompanied him. As I waited, I saw Fakhri, an old friend, crossing on the other side and called him over to chat. Fakhri is older than me. He is one of the few people in the neighborhood who's still affiliated with a left-wing party, and just the night before he had been explaining to me a true leftist would never change their affiliation to a religious faction which he regards as inherently right-wing. When I called out to him, he said he was just going to the toilet and would be back in a minute. Suddenly, a wall of fire smashed into me, followed by smoke. Before I knew it, I was standing in a cloud of dust. I tried to run. Huge quantities of rubble were showering down on us. I covered my head with my hands and ran down the narrow road to the south, trying to find anything to hide under. Somehow I'd lost my shoes. I ran barefoot, my brothers Mohammed and Ibrahim running alongside me. After about 200 meters, I had to stop. After a moment, I walked back towards the car and tried to find my shoes. Until now, I hadn't felt anything. Only then did I notice something warm on my leg. It was blood, a lot of it. I wiped it away with my hand and walked towards the targeted houses. Someone shouted that there was someone under the rubble near the tree out in the street. We all tried our hardest to remove the concrete and cement. To my horror, it was Fakhri lying there, dead. The ambulance arrived and the civil defense team as well. We carried Fakhri on a stretcher. My relative Fawad was found near the door of his house. Luckily, we managed to remove some rubble which had fallen around his face so that he could breathe. After 10 minutes, we got him out. But there was news about Maha, his wife, and their 5 kids. Maha is also Hannah's cousin. It's believed they all died in the fire, if not before. Niha, another woman from my family, was found dead lying in her bedroom in a building on the other side of the street, having been hit by a concrete lintel thrown from the targeted building. I spent most of today lying on a bed in the press house. My wound seems to be more painful. I cleaned it again, this time with salt and water, and cover it using a new piece of cloth. Poor Hannah, from one loss to another. Now her cousin. Once more, I listened to her cry over and over on the phone. Monday, November 6th. This morning, Mohammed al-Jaja was killed along with his entire family. I cried when I heard the news. Yesterday, I stood with him at the front door of the press house and suggested that he didn't stay in his flat in the Nasser quarter. It was getting too dangerous there. He lived in a first-floor apartment in a building on the same street as Al-Shifa Hospital. Bilal told him to bring his family and move into the press house that night. He scoffed at the idea and as he walked away said, See you tomorrow. When I go to visit Wissam, I see Mohammed's body laid out on the ground outside the hospital, among dozens of corpses, the spoils of last night's raids on Al-Shati camp and Nasser quarter. I don't realize it's him at first. I just see his blue vest and think, what a shame, another journalist. It doesn't occur to me that it might be him. Over the last week, Mohammed has come into the press house each day with 5 spare bundles of bread to distribute amongst his friends. Some days, of course, he failed in his search and would feel guilty when he showed up empty-handed. It's okay, I'd say. Man can survive without bread. Now, we have to survive without him. He had a plan to take his wife and kids on a vacation in Europe. We'll take a whole month, he said. You thinking of immigrating? I asked, surprised. No, he said firmly. The future will be better in Gaza. From the window of the 4th floor in Al-Shifa Hospital, the view below is beyond belief. Dead bodies lie scattered across the ground in all directions. Camera teams huddle around interviewees. A group of young girls sit, playing with toys together. A man and a woman are setting up a tent for their family, trying to clear some space for them and their kids. 3 ambulances arrive, bringing more dead from last night's raids. A dozen men queue outside a barber's stall, waiting to have their hair cut. A young girl fixes her hijab so it looks more suitable on her head. For an hour, I gaze over this new town of Al-Shifa, a town made out of refugees from the city that used to be known as Gaza. Tuesday, November 7th. Gaza is bleeding away. Fresh food has all but gone. The only produce left in shops are dry, non-perishables. The queues for water are getting longer, and people are disappearing. I went to the Jabalia town center last night to look for some meat, but since we arrived late, all the butcher shops were closed. I promised Faraj that I'd prepare something delicious for us that night. I don't remember when I last ate red meat. We had chicken about 10 days ago, but not red meat. I asked Faraj to get us some flour. Flour? He questioned. Yes, just trust me, I said. It seems luck is staying with me tonight as I find a stall selling turkey. The man is busy taking orders from those crowding around his table. His assistant slaughters the birds, plucks them, and cuts them into thighs, chests, and wings as we wait. He sells you what you ask for, up to a certain limit. I managed to get 1.5 kilos. We made a fire on the 2nd unfinished floor of the house. I mixed the flour with water and salt. Then Muhammad helped in making the paste into loaves, ready to be baked. On the fire, I put a piece of metal which, once heated up, became our forno. I made 20 small loaves, then I started to prepare the turkey, which I cut into slices. In a huge pan on the fire, I fried the onion and pepper before mixing in the meat. Some spices from the kitchen, then we had our meal. This is what we call sajja, which is made on wood fire only. What a feast we had. Yasser asked me why there is only lemon in the vegetable shop. Because there's only lemon, I reply. But what are people using it for, he continues. Even lemonade needs bottled water, and no one has that anymore. Wednesday, November 8th. For the last few nights, my brother Mohammed's snoring has been a kind of consolation. When I hear his snoring, I forget about all the other sounds and become fully occupied by my simple, natural annoyance. Ironically, this annoyance allows me to escape the situation and ultimately fall asleep. But last night, Mohammed didn't snore. People say you snore because of the position you're sleeping in, so I tried to roll him over. I didn't want to think of the rockets anymore. I wanted a goddamn break. In a way, I was begging him to snore, but he wouldn't. I went to pay my condolences to my friend Salim and his mother for the loss of his brother Majid. Majid passed away in an Israeli jail recently after the soldiers refused to give him his medication. For the last couple of years, he had suffered from cancer and had to take specific treatment. After the war broke out, he was arrested along with many other laborers in Israel from Gaza. In the prison, the soldiers took his medication off him and threw it away. His mother now has one wish: to see him before he's buried. This means bringing his body back to Gaza. She knows how impossible this is nowadays, but her heart, the heart of a mother, does not. Bilal looks at me piercingly. "How much longer, Atef?" he asks. I know what that look means. The war has dragged on much longer than either of us expected. When exactly? I know what he's trying to suggest. I relent. Come tomorrow, I say, we'll start thinking about heading south. I make a promise that we'll move together. We are out of options. Then comes the question, where will we stay in the south and how will we manage? There are many difficulties ahead of us if we cross the Wadi. As I write this in the press house, I can hear men, women, and children shouting in the street. I go out front to see what's going on. Hundreds of them are carrying their belongings and running down the street. What's happening, I ask, and a man tells me they were all staring in the UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East, schools near the beach, close to the fish market, but the tanks are there now, so they had to leave. He suggests that we take care as the tanks and bulldozers are approaching. According to him, the tanks are now just half a kilometer from the press house. Many people have been killed at the western end of the street for just getting in the tank's way. Another man tells me he saw tanks and bulldozers destroying the mosque near the schools and the villas around it. They burn everything, he shouts as he runs, without slowing down. This has been a wall of fire smashed into me, dispatches from a month in Gaza, excerpts from the diary of Atef Abu Saif, the same poet who I read a piece from November 2006, earlier in my channel. Reader's note that I am editing this on February 14th, and it has been 130 days since October 7th, and that this has not begun with October 7th, but it has been something ongoing, that Israel's comptroller released a report condemning torture of Palestinians way back in 1995, and that this has been going on for decades before that. They found that 40 out of 41 prisoners had been tortured. This is not a new struggle, but this is a new genocide. I love my Jewish friends and will continue to uplift their voices, and will also record some voices of Israeli and Jewish folks who are anti-Zionist and also can understand that this is not a Jewish project, it is a colonial and imperialist project. These are children, not terrorists.